Hi everyone. I hope this is working. So I guess we're about to do the winter forecast and then look at the model output as well. So I've got Gav here, and I think we're going to do our usual. I suspect most of you have already viewed some of these live streams, so I guess you know what's going to happen. So Gav, what do you think about the upcoming weather situation?
Evening, Quantum. Evening, everyone. So a few days ago, it looked like we could get a really blocked spell of weather, and it looked like it's going to go really quite cold for the end of November. We are going to get it a bit colder over the next few days. The blocking doesn't look quite as extensive as we was expecting like 3 or 4 days ago. But nevertheless, it looks like we are already starting to see signs of high latitude blocking beginning to become influential. So, it's early days of that. You normally expect us to be in a zonal sort of westerly type pattern in the middle of November. So, quite unusual to be seeing the charts that we're seeing at the moment, I think, for this point of the year.
So I've got netweather.tv up, and so I thought we could start with the primary HPA and see surface level pressure. So this is the GFS, and I haven't looked at any charts all day. So I think the last time I looked at a weather chart was actually on Friday. So I'm a little bit unsure what I know about the Scandinavian blocking and the possible retrogression to Greenland, but
yeah, that's right. So the retrogression isn't as powerful now, I don't think, for the end of the coming week as it appeared it was going to be 2 or 3 days ago. But we still have a massive Scandinavian high there. So again, quite unusual for the middle of November to see that.
Okay, so pushing it through to Monday at midday. So we've got this sort of continental easterly flow. In some sort of situations where there was a substantial buildup of cold air over the continent, that could actually be quite a cold chart. If there was a significant amount of cold air over the continent, but as it is mid-November, it isn't particularly cold, but it's still quite chilly, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. It's not going to be a beach from the east, but it's going to be colder than what we've had for a while.
Sort of uppers are getting towards -5, so probably not cold enough for snow, where you'd need to, especially at this time of year, where I suspect to get snow, you'd probably be looking at -6, -7 at least from this sort of pattern.
That's right, but unless you're at elevation this week, I don't think you'll be seeing snow.
I suppose even though we're not going to see that retrogression again, I haven't looked at these charts. The one possibility of getting some widespread snow is if you get a warm front coming into it, because when that happens, you don't even really need the air to be that cold. Warm front situations are quite generous to producing snow, so there's always the possibility that if some Atlantic front could come into this and that could produce some snow, but I doubt we'll get any snow in the form of showers. It's just not.
I don't think we're going to get the sort of Atlantic system coming into the cold air either, particularly, but of course we'll wait and see on that. But I think it'll just be a case that the cold air kind of runs out of steam around the middle part of the week.
Okay, so by the time we get to Tuesday, I guess it's more of the same. We've got this sort of chilly easterly developing across the UK.
That's right.
I imagine this is not going to be pleasant weather. It's going to be quite cloudy, probably a bit of fog around, I would imagine, with these sorts of southeasterly winds.
Quite gloomy, quite murky sort of conditions.
I don't think it will even be that cold, even by night, though, because you've got quite a strong wind. So I suppose any patches of frost are likely to be confined to western parts. So I guess sheltered parts of Wales, maybe even the southwest of England, central Scotland, of course, and parts of Ireland could see some patchy frost by night. But I think most of the east will actually stay frost-free.
Yeah, could well do. It's just not the depth of cold really to offset the wind and the cloud there.
So you look at these maximum temperatures, it's not a pleasant. I mean, it's well below average, sort of talking mid-level single figures, but it's not really that cold.
That's right. Everything is comparative in the weather. So for the middle of November and compared to what we've had through November so far, then that is cold, but it's not beach from the east cold. It's not even sort of cold enough to bring snow.
And you can see actually what I was saying is I put the minimum temperature up for Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, and you can see the frost patches are sort of confined to largely western parts, because the east is going to be kept relatively mild by the sea off the offshore breeze.
That's right. So anywhere sheltered from that easterly wind could get frost. So that would be sort of mid Wales, maybe Western Scotland, southwestern Scotland, those sort of areas where have shelter from the easterly wind and from the cloud. Looks quite cold across France, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think I guess there's more of a depth of cold that's already been established there. Plus, there's more shelter, of course, from the easterly wind.
Of course, no modification from the North Sea, particularly either, I suppose.
I think what we could see around these eastern coasts is an extremely low diurnal temperature range. So I imagine the daytime maximum and the nighttime minimum will be pretty similar. Not really much variation at all.
I suppose wind chill would be a factor as well. It will feel quite cold, especially on the east coast.
I imagine wind chills at times could sort of touch freezing point in some exposed parts.
Yeah,
when you're talking 6s, 5s, 6s, and 7s, with a stiff breeze, you could take 6 degrees off that with the wind, so it could still feel very cold.
Yeah, it'll be a case of wrap up if you're on the east coast.
I wonder if there's any convection embedded in any of this. See, it does look like there's quite a lot of precipitation here. Oh, I guess that's because you've got this easterly wave coming in, so you can see you've got these low heights. So imagine if you were to look at the 500 millibar temperatures, which I can get on Meteosil. One way of getting a sort of idea of the instability of the atmosphere as a whole is to look at the 500 HPA temperatures, and you can see that if you've got quite cold air at the 500 millibar level, then that's quite conductive to sort of deep level convection. So it's probably not surprising that by the time we've got to midweek, there's quite a few showers about.
Yeah, they'll even merge into longer spells of rain. And I suppose over the sort of the North York moors, the Pennines, maybe those sort of areas, there might be some sleet or snow mixed in with those showers as well by the middle part of the week.
I mean, the possibility of this turning to snow, I suppose, would be dependent on evaporation or cooling, and to get that you'd really need the air to stagnate, but the wind is just going to be too strong. Actually, if we get the winds up a bit slowly, so actually this is midweek, I suppose you can see that the winds have died down a little bit, so I suppose there is the outside possibility of this sort of thing happening, but snow is almost certainly going to be restricted to higher ground, like you say.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think we'll be seeing snow at lower levels.
I think it's always worth watching, though. If you ever get any kind of frontal set up, you ever get air that's quite cold but not particularly cold, and then you get no wind, that can produce snow. That's the one that always sort of gets people out, because it doesn't even have to be that cold, but if you get a lot of evaporation or cooling, so what you're looking for, I guess, is relatively low humidity. Of course, when there's precipitation, humidity is going to usually be high anyway, but you're looking for relatively low humidity, so quite dry air, and a lack of wind. And that's why warm fronts are such good snow producers, because ahead of a warm front, the air is extremely dry. There's a lot of evaporation ahead of a warm front, and there's basically no wind. So if there's ever a situation where you get a relatively coherent, strong front that comes into any of this, then I suppose it's always possible.
Yeah, that's right. So the evaporative cooling snow events are the ones that always sort of catch the forecasters out a bit. So quite a few of those happened in the 80s. I remember quite a few scenarios where it was expected to rain, and it would start as rain, and then as the rain got heavier, it would turn to snow, and you'd have a surprise snowfall. You'd wake up in the morning after rain was forecast overnight, and you wake up to a covering of snow. So but those situations don't seem to happen as regularly now as they used to.
I've just got one of the WRF outputs, of course, because the high resolution model tends to resolve these features a little bit better. And you can see actually there is some hatching here, which implies really to quite low levels the possibility of a little bit of sleetiness in Wales on Wednesday. I wouldn't really take these charts too literally, but I guess the point about this is that it's emphasizing that there is a possibility that if you get a little bit of evaporation or cooling, there could be some wet sleetiness. I still think this is going to be 100, 200 meters. I don't think it's going to get down to sea level, but there's the outside possibility there, I guess.
Welsh mountains could be okay to get a decent fall of snow, perhaps, and like I say, the Pennines, those sort of regions.
And you can see, of course, over the Cairngorms as well, you're always going to get snow there.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But
Scottish mountains will be okay.
you can see, I guess also you can see that where the hatching is also where the wind has died down a little bit. So there's no sort of snow over the northern Pennines because you've got this quite strong wind here, but over sort of the Welsh mountains, it's a little bit, the wind's died down a bit there.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe a little bit over the Staffordshire moorlands,
Mm.
Peaks, those sort of areas as well. A little bit of hatching there, I think.
You can see it's sort of developing a little bit. I guess with your video forecasts, I suppose when we get close to this sort of time, it's going to be a day by day type thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. There might be a snow event, a snow watch, not a snow event, a snow watch appearing sometime around Tuesday. But it just depends whether the situation warrants it. At the moment, it probably doesn't look like it won't, but I'll keep it reviewed anyway.
It's certainly less interesting than what we had last month, actually, because there was a snow event last month, which is of course even more unusual for October.
Yeah, that's right. It was a little bit surprising, that one. I didn't do a snow watch for that one actually, and there was a little bit more than I expected with that. So
I think it's the first substantive snow event, October snow event since 2012, and then of course there was another one in 2008. I think the 2008 one was the one that people tended to remember, but there was a 2012 one as well.
Yeah, I remember the 2008. That was a really heavy snowfall actually. That was one of those situations where it was rain and then the air cooled and it turned to snow through the afternoon in 2008. So, and then after that, it sort of froze and hung around for a day or so, which is very unusual for October.
I remember the 2000. I don't remember the 2008 one much because I was because as far as I'm aware, the 2008 one mostly affected the southeast, didn't it? So there wasn't much.
Yeah, more southern based.
But the 2012 one I remember because I was in the northeast when that one happened. And there was a period of quite heavy snow that lasted about an hour or two, sort of during the evening, and that was quite unusual. People were surprised to see snow at that time of year. But yeah,
it just goes to show anything can happen with the weather.
Exactly. Okay, so we're at Wednesday at this point. I guess you can see that by the time we get to Thursday, I guess as the geopotential heights are starting to raise as well, you'd expect the weather to not be quite as unsettled. So that I suppose things will be drying out by the time we get to Thursday, and they'll also.
Yeah, I think showers sort of pull towards the coastal areas on Thursday and Friday, and it turns drier inland. General idea, but it's quite an unusual sort of synoptic situation that's occurring at the end of the week actually. So it'll be quite complicated to forecast for actually Thursday and Friday. But I think the general idea will be showers towards the coast, dry land, and possibly sort of fog might become more of a problem at the end of the week.
Yeah, I mean, southeasterly winds are pretty famous for being fog during late autumn and winter. So I won't be surprised to see quite a few fog patches. That could really hold the temperatures down during the day, of course, as well, if you get a stubborn fog patch.
Yes, it's possible that it'll be colder at the end of the week without the easterly wind than it will be with the easterly wind if we start to get quite a lot of widespread fog.
And of course, if the wind's dying down as well, and that will also give the possibility of more widespread frost, and not just in western areas.
Yeah, where skies are clear, frost could be becoming increasingly widespread at the end of the week, I would have thought.
Okay, so now I'm looking at Friday now. So we've still got this sort of stubborn area of low pressure that I guess is giving. I mean, I imagine there's sort of some weak fronts connected to this. Maybe one sort of an included front kind of around here. That's sort of giving sort of patchy rain, maybe a few showers. It's just generally a gloomy day. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, a lot of murk, a lot of gloom, and pretty sort of typical December weather, really, I would have thought. So, not very pleasant.
Notice that the 552 geopotential height line has managed to get to Greenland. That's always a good sign.
Yeah, that's a sign of genuine blocking appearing. So you see the high pressures around Iceland. So again, very unusual weather patterns for what is then the 23rd of November. That's very unusual to have that kind of weather pattern at that point of the year, because this would typically be a very westerly and sort of zonal time of the year. As of course the Arctic's cooling down, and we've got the contrast between the Arctic and and the Atlantic. So you would typically get a lot of westerly winds at this point of the year. So quite unusual to see high pressure around Iceland like that.
Well, look at the jet stream. It's pretty incoherent. You can see the sort of two arms of the jet stream, one going to the north, one going to the south.
Yeah, this has been an ongoing sort of situation since the start of the year, since February, when we have that big southern stratospheric warming, and then we have the beach from the east, and then we have the hot summer, of course, with all that high pressure over Scandinavia and over UK. So it's sort of been a strange year for the jet stream. The jet stream's been acting quite unusually and quite abnormally, which is, I think, something that we have to think about when we come to think about the winter. If this sort of unusual jet stream behaviour continues, then what does that mean for the winter? It'll be interesting to see.
Of course, if you want really cold weather, I think it's quite good to have a southerly jet stream, but not necessarily a really incoherent and weak one. Because I mean, like, you'll know that sort of you often need low pressure to the south to support the blocking high pressure to the north. Otherwise, it just tends to collapse to the south. That's
right. In that sort of situation, the jet stream looks so sluggish that everything can just sort of meander around and nothing really happens, sort of thing. So
I guess that's kind of what we've got going on at the moment, really.
That's right.
So 120 hours in the future, so still fairly reliable time frame. I mean, I think it's quite good that we've got these yellow colours appearing over Greenland. You can see the really cold airs over here. I mean, it's not a million miles away, really, is it?
On the eastern side of the block, that's where the real cold air is digging in. So just slight adjustments will start to move that down into Northern Europe.
So I guess by the time we get to Saturday, it's more of the same. We've lost the low pressure, so I think things are becoming a bit more settled. High pressure still over Iceland. Sort of a really weak, flabby area of high pressure. Not really much.
A few days ago, that was being forecast to become a major block over Greenland and allow that northerly to really dig in to Europe and to the UK even. But now the high pressure coming a bit stuck around Iceland, just not quite going far enough north to let those very cold north to northeasterly winds let them in. So
I think we are starting to see a slightly colder direction though. I mean, the air coming around this high pressure is coming now more from Scandinavia as opposed to...
That's right. It's starting to filter in from the northeast.
You see there's some genuine deep cold here. I mean, okay, not deep, really deep cold, but it's quite a lot. It's a more significant...
a lot colder for Scandinavia than they've had for a while.
You can see if I put on the 2 meter temperatures, you can see this sort of quite substantive area of cold over Scandinavia.
That's right. It's digging in there to the northeast. But a few days ago, that was forecast to be quite a lot more potent and quite a lot more widespread than that across, even backing into the UK as well.
Okay, so I guess not as interesting as it was, but I mean, there's still interest here, I think.
Definitely, but pattern, as I say, it's very unusual for this point of the year. And again, very slight adjustment. It could possibly be that high pressure and the block will be upgraded over the coming days, and it will start to get itself up to green, because you never know with these blocking features. They can very quickly, by model output, be upgraded. So it's possible that this could turn into something quite significant.
And I guess we're on Sunday now, and yeah, there's this quite sort of, I guess the UK is almost in a cold pattern with sort of low pressure on either side, high pressure on either side, so quite a slack pattern.
Right.
But this is the whole thing I was talking about, with the possibility of an Atlantic front coming into the cold air that's already been established over the UK. I mean, this is not really a coherent front. I mean, I imagine there's some kind of occluded front going on over here, so I guess no real snow on that, but depending on how this low pressure comes into the cold, there's always a possibility of having some kind of snow event at the end of next weekend, or maybe in the following week, with something coming into already established cold air.
Yeah, the cold air has established there over that weekend of the 24th, 25th. So I mean, it's not as cold as it looked like it might be a few days ago, but it is still pretty cold air that's filtered in from the northeast there. So again, if that high pressure and the cold block are there, proves to be a little bit stubborn, then yeah, we could have some fun and games there, I suppose.
Okay, so continuing a little bit further. I suppose the low pressure is just really making slow progress in towards the UK, isn't it?
Yeah, same sort of story that we've had a lot this year, which is low pressure, not with a great deal of conviction, sort of trying to move into high pressure and struggling. Seen a lot of that this year.
I guess there's just no sort of momentum, is there, in this area of low pressure? It's just not really making any progress. See, as we go on further, we've got this sort of. I guess eventually there seems to be a sort of the Atlantic does seem to win, and we get this more southwesterly flow.
Very gradually, it's reverting into an Atlantic flow. It's taking a long time to do it. We're like 240 hours there. It's taken a long time to get to that point, and that is, in such a blocked situation, that's a very, very long way out.
And we've still got sort of this 552 land that's just about surviving over Greenland, so it's still a pretty blocked pattern even then.
Yeah, that's right. That low pressure is not moving in with any real conviction, and whilst it is breaking down the ridge and taking us into Atlantic flow, it's taking a long time to do it. And in such a block scenario, that's a very long way out, 10 days away. So I would expect there'll be significant adjustments to that over the next few days. Of course, it might evolve as that is showing, but I would anticipate there'll be some quite significant adjustments to that. So in 10 days' time, Wednesday, the 28th of November, I would suspect it'll be a rather different weather pattern that is actually occurring to what that is forecasting.
But even if it did happen like that, then that would not be a bad pattern to start off with, because of course you've got a situation now where you've still got a relatively blocked pattern with relatively high pressure over Greenland. You've got a weak jet stream, and you've got extremely cold air just to the north of the UK. I mean, the air up here near Iceland is extremely cold. So I mean, again, from this point, it wouldn't take much for this low pressure to sort of move away to the east and then get a northerly coming in behind that could bring some cold weather. So it's still quite a good pattern.
That's right. It still is looking very untypical to what you would expect on the 28th of November. Normally, you would expect to be seeing the Atlantic in a very buoyant, situation and strong westerly winds and strong zonality. So even that's looking untypical of what you would expect for the time of the year.
I guess just for fun, just flipping through the low resolution charts.
So the low really gets wound up there, actually, doesn't it? Just beyond day 10, the low really intensified, turned a little bit stormy.
But also the cold air sort of makes some progress in northern parts of Scotland. But yeah, this is just for fun. I mean, there's no real value in these charts. But again, I suppose the idea behind this is that it just shows how close the cold air is and how easily it can be brought in at a moment's notice.
That's right. In this kind of situation, we've got to keep a very, very close eye on what's happening at relatively short time frames. So the stuff that's in like 240 to 384 hours is always interesting to have a look at it. But really, the focus has got to be within sort of the day 5, 6, 7, 8 time frame. That's when we're likely to see potentially in this sort of pattern quite significant adjustments. So kind of like the reliable time frame, what we think of as the reliable time frame in a zonal westerly situation, which is our typical default setup, the reliable time frame can be sometimes as much as 7 to 10 days. But in this kind of pattern, the reliable time frame when it's very blocked, probably no more than around 3 to 5, and you can get quite significant changes around sort of day 5, day 6, day 7. So that's the sort of time frame we've got to be looking at quite closely, I think, with what's happening with this blocking high.
So if we go back to 180, which is not this Monday, but the following Monday, then look at what the previous one suggested. And there's some difference there. I'd say the 6Z is probably slightly colder than the 12Z, and got more of an easterly established.
That's right. It'll be changing from run to run those days, sort of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 time frames.
Have a quick look at the ECM as well. You could probably look at the other one later, but look at the zeros at ECM, which is actually out now. See what that's going for. So the same sort of stuff, but there seems to be
by day 10, the ECM was looking. I think it was looking poised to bring some northerlies down.
Well, I mean, actually, I've got 268 hours, and this is already looking quite a lot better. You can see that there's a much stronger block established over Greenland. I mean, it's not at the surface; it's at sort of higher levels, but the geopotential height is very good over Greenland. You can see that 552 line is quite far north.
Yeah, that's right. It was a reasonable run, I think. The big night.
Okay, well there you go. There's your sort of cold northerly. I mean, you've got cold air already, and sort of in the northern Isles by 192 hours.
That's right.
That's sort of just that's sort of filtering away to the east, isn't it? I mean, that often happens. That sort of things end up going to Scandinavia and sort of eastern parts of Europe. But that's a very cold chart. That is. That would be cold enough for snow for most.
Yeah, I think so. And then 240 look like that.
Way to the east, hasn't it? But that's a lot colder than the GFS. I mean, we're just sort of skirting with the edge of the cold there. But I mean, the cold is sort of, we're just on the edge of it, so you can see sort of 192 colds up here, and then it's sort of pushing away to the east. But we're sort of just on the edge of it. But that's a hell of a lot colder than the GFS. And that would be cold.
It's a colder run, that one, than the GFS, because the ECM will be updating between 6 and 7 o'clock. So it's interesting to see what the midday does at the ECM.
I suppose we can have a look at, well, if we want to continue with the theme of the uncertainty of these model runs, I guess we could have a look at the ensembles to get an idea of the kind of spread. Where are they again? So actually, we can probably do it on the weather. Might be easier just to get an idea of that. So ensembles. Let's just look at London. Just wasn't it? So these are the upper air temperatures. All the different runs. Oh, this is still the 6Z though. So we can have a look at the 12Z in a second on Meteosphere, which would have already updated. And there aren't any ensembles really below the -10, so you know there's no real suggestion of really deep cold on the GFS. But like you say, things can change.
Yeah, and it's very early to be seeing -10 anyway. So minus 10 is.
I do agree that seeing -10.
Actually, I think there is one ensemble member right on the 3rd of December that dips to -10, isn't there?
I mean, the thing is though, the reason I like to be seeing -10 is that if you see a lot of -10s on the ensembles, it doesn't mean that you get a -10 in reality, but you do need to be seeing. I kind of find it to get a proper cold snap, you do need to have quite a few of those ensemble members below that -10 line. Even if you don't actually get to the -10 in reality, you do generally need to have a few of those members to showing that degree of cold. But there's not a lot of support for it. So this is quite a disappointing ensemble chart, I would say.
I think the ensembles have moved towards quite a milder setup over the past 24 to 48 hours. I think they've shifted quite significantly. But again, with these block setups, you can sometimes get dramatic ensemble shifts. So although they have shifted in a milder direction over the past couple of days, they could easily start to shift in a colder direction again.
Well, that's true. I mean, of course, to get some of that really deep cold in towards the UK would only require a slight shift in the position of that high pressure, or I mean, a slightly stronger high that can maintain its integrity over Greenland would be the ideal.
A lot of people think that ensemble data is kind of like more reliable than operation runs, and it is It is more reliable, but it is still in me situations when there's a lot of blocking. Ensembles can still be prone to quite significant shifts over relatively short time periods.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We can have a look at the 12Z ensemble actually on Meteo Seal. So these are the 12Zs, I think. Oh yeah, they are the 12Zs. So we put that forward to say 180. That's still 12Z. Have a look at the general pattern. There's a few interesting ones. Most of them have this sort of chilly easterly, this sort of folks cold type easterly. But there's a little bit of interest. This one here, perturbation 8, is quite cold. It's got more of a northeasterly element to it. That one's one of the more interesting ones. This one is, I guess, interesting in a different way. It's not cold, but it has very cold air very close to the UK. So this one isn't cold, but it's very close to being very cold. This one is still that sort of focus cold easterly, but some sort of colder air is starting to be imported into that easterly. So I guess that one's interesting as well. It looks like there's almost more interest in the 12Z ensembles than there was in the 6Z. What do you think?
Yeah, possibly. It could well be that the ensemble is starting to model that block a little bit differently compared to the 6 o'clock. So again, it'll just be a case of keep a very close eye day by day on what's going on with this blocking feature. Where's it going, and what's going to happen with it? So again, I mean, we're at 180 hours away, which in this kind of block setup is a very long time out anyway. So we just got to keep a close eye on it. It may be something, it may be nothing, or it may be something. We just got to wait and see.
It's why I tend to use these geopotential height charts, because although they don't give you direct information about what's happening at the surface, they're far more reliable at longer ranges than the sea level pressure charts, which are sort of more useful. But you can see sort of, if you look at the geopotential height, which is essentially ignoring the lines and just looking at the colours, you can see that some of them have these yellow and brighter greens out towards Greenland, whereas this one, for example, has the yellows sort of towards Eastern Europe and southern parts of Scandinavia. And I would suggest that the ones where the brighter yellows are towards Greenland are somewhat better for trying to get deep cold into the UK. So this one, let's see, not so much that one definitely, that one as well, that one. So I guess about a third of them still have some kind of retrogression going on, and 2/3 of them have the high pressure sort of collapsing.
That's right. So
still a 33% chance of something interesting, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And of course, the period that's going to determine what happens by 180 is going to be before that. So it'll be kind of like days 6, 7, 8 will be determining what's going on with this blocking feature. A lot of the time, models will always try to collapse blocking very quickly anyway. We'll try to get out of it if they can. So I have to keep that back in mind as well. There is always they very often try to break down blocking highs quickly, and it could often take a lot longer than the models think it will take.
But also, I would also bear in mind that sometimes if you look at not so much with ensembles, but if you look at I don't know, the big three, you look at the ECM, the UKMO, and the GFS. Often a good rule of thumb is you pick the one that doesn't show the cold, and it turns out that one tends to be right. Unfortunately, often when the big three models disagree on deep or prolonged cold, the one that isn't suggesting the deep or prolonged cold tends to be right. And in my experience, you only tend to get deep or prolonged cold when all three are sort of on board with it. But of course, again, like you say, this is a long way ahead. So this principle really only applies by the time we get to, say, I don't know, 168 or 144 hours or so. You know, the UKMO only goes out to 144 hours anyway. But what I tend to find is that you only tend to get deep or prolonged cold when all three of these models agree on it. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, what can often happen as well, I think mishap before the beast release is that you'll get one model that goes for it, one model that doesn't. And then the model that was going for it will back away, and the model that didn't go for it will go for it. And in the end, somehow you kind of like meet in the middle somewhere. But there can always be a lot of twists and turns building up to any sort of cold spell. But yeah, given our position in the world, generally bet on the one that doesn't show anything particularly cold going on in the winter.
I certainly remember the switching and swapping with the ECM will initially go for cold, GFS will go for less cold conditions, and the GFS will flip, and then the ECM will go milder. But even when that happens, the one that tends to not go for the cold tends to win out. Although I think actually last year was a little bit of an exception because it turned out that the beast from the east actually did happen. Although I seem to remember it was somewhat less severe than it was forecast to be.
Yeah, the only cold spell I can remember that was modelled completely straightforwardly from sort of beginning to end was 2010, the December.
But the 2010 one was like all the models agreed on it, all the ensembles agreed on it, and they were all showing very, very, very cold conditions. So I think that one was sort of, it was so much of a dead cert because there was so little uncertainty in the pattern. It was sort of quite, everything was on board with that.
That's right. It was so straightforward. It's a shame that all of our cold spells can't be that straightforward, isn't it? Make forecasting them a lot easier.
And will make sort of model watching a lot less stressful as well, I guess.
Yeah, you wouldn't get as many mood swings on the forums and
exactly
this kind of thing if it was always modelled like it was in the December to remember.
Mind you, I think the cold spell that we had last year, if that had happened during January, I think that would have definitely rivaled December 2010. The only reason it really didn't rival 2010 was because of the time of year that it happened at. It didn't really happen even in winter. It was sort of getting towards the start of spring by that point.
Yeah, it's very late.
But the uppers were ridiculously there. I think that we had uppers of about -16, which we haven't had uppers that cold since the coincident, the other March cold spell of 2013. But -16 uppers are unbelievably rare. I'm always surprised when I see them. And I remember last year when I was sort of watching that Beast from these cold spell develop, because there were three separate ones, weren't there? There was like 3 different waves of it. I think in the first wave, which had the coldest uppers, I remember looking at the ensembles. I remember looking at the GFS ensembles and the ECM ensembles. And I remember the coldest temperature I managed to find was about -23 on the upper air temperature, and that would break if that had happened, it would have broken an all-time record by about 4 degrees, because I think -19 is the coldest in terms of upper air temperature that the UK has ever got, and I think that was in that 1987 cold spell during January.
Yeah, that's right.
So to see these sort of -20, -21, -22 temperatures actually appearing on the ensembles was really quite impressive. I mean, obviously it didn't actually happen, but we still got -16, which was really impressive.
Yeah, it was very exciting to see those ensemble graphs taking sort of the coloured lines down to sort of -20. Don't see that all that often.
Exactly. I don't think we'll actually see -20. I mean, imagine how.
Yeah, the upper air temperatures, I meant.
Okay, the surface temperature.
Upper air temperature graphs going down to -20. Yeah.
Okay.
Quite something.
It's quite a little bit curious to see how this is developed by 240. Not a huge signal for substantial cold, but like you say, things could change. Do you want to have a look at the ECM ensembles?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay. Unfortunately, this is in some kind of Canadian, or I don't know, is it like some weird Californian time? Maybe I don't know exactly what the time zone is. So I always find this difficult because I don't really understand the time zone that this is in, so it's a bit irritating. Nevertheless, it's pretty much the only place that you can get custom zoom. Why isn't it letting me zoom in? Oh, hang on.
I think you need to go to
Oh,
your.
okay, there we go. I think I managed to zoom in. There we go. But this is irritating because the time zone on this is one that I haven't. I think it's like a -8 hour conversion or something like that. So I'm not sure. Nevertheless, we can actually get all the ensembles on here. So I'm just going to go to quite far out. I think this is only 180 hours anyway. So let's go. It says Monday at 12, but I'm not exactly sure what that means. Whether it's in whether. But anyway, this is reasonably far out, so we can just flick through the ensembles, and I'll put
The date anyway is the 26th of November.
indeed. Where's so many parameters on this? Is this actually a really good website? Weather.us. I guess we'll just go with mean sea level pressure. Okay, so that's what the ECM went for. That sort of relatively cold northerly winds. So I'm just going to flick through all the members. So that's cold. That's a northeasterly.
Yeah, that's right. Quite
On the control run there.
the signal to the northwest.
That's quite cold as well. More of an easterly, but again, it's a little bit colder than the GFS was suggesting.
Yeah, that's right.
That's just depressing. That's not really cold. It's just wet and miserable. That's quite cold. That's very cold. I mean, that's very cold indeed. That would have snow on it, I imagine. That's mostly dry, but again quite cold. I mean that one again is one of these sort of grey drizzly type. Maybe some rain on that. Not massively cold, but still getting there. I think these ECM ensembles are quite a lot colder than the GFS ones actually. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think the ECM is in line with its operational run.
Look at that one. That one's cold.
High level of northern blocking.
Not so much. So there's a lot more sort of high pressure to the northwest on these ECM ensembles, isn't there?
Yeah, they're placing it closer to Greenland, which potentially allows colder air to move in from the northeast.
See, that's a cold northerly there. I mean, actually, if I quickly put on the 850 temperatures. Okay, maybe not as cold as I thought, actually. But it would still sort of develop into I guess a colder northerly there. Okay, these are more promising than the GFS ones anyway.
I think so.
That one's not so good. Neither is that one. That one looks quite cold actually. Let's have a look at the 850s though. Yeah, I mean that one's okay. I mean, kind of not quite cold enough for snow, but potentially getting there.
Yeah, not talking about outstandingly cold weather, but certainly not bad for the end of November.
That one looks quite good as well. That one looks quite good as well. I imagine that we're sort of on the periphery of the cold with that one. Yeah, again, you can see that one I would actually take over the previous one because you can see there is actually some deep cold to the north on that one. No, that one's terrible. That one's okay. That one could be one of these sort of fronts into cold air type situations there. Could be a bit of a frontal snow event on that one. In the northerly. I think the thing that sort of the common theme of coming across here is that none of the charts are actually showing anything coming from the Atlantic.
That's right. Weather pattern remains very abnormal. Well, not really abnormal, but very unusual for the end of November, which again is typically a more westerly zonal period of the year. So again, quite different.
Oh, there we go. There's a really good one. That's a cold one. I mean, again, the cold is just sort of coming into play there, but you can see the pattern is much more from the north than it is from the east on this one. I don't really think there were any GFS ensembles that were overwhelmingly good, but there's quite a few ECM ensembles that I'm liking the look of here. A lot more sort of northerly based ones, and quite a lot fewer east. I mean, look at this one for example. This one is This one's very cold as well. 850s are less impressive though.
Definitely, there's a lot of high pressure going on, sort of to the northwest on a lot of those ensemble members. So again, very atypical to what you would expect at the time of the year.
I'm kind of thinking that even if we don't get anything particularly impressive in the next couple of weeks, it still seems that there's plenty of opportunity to get a cold snap, I guess, by the first week of December. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about here. Just nothing sort of, no tabloid headline type stuff at the moment. But in terms of overall pattern, there's a lot to be pleased about here.
Yeah, I think it's very encouraging, really, the patterns we're seeing at the moment. For anyone that wants a cold start to the winter. I mean, we won't be talking about, as we've established, not about severely cold, but if anyone wants like a seasonably cold start to the winter season, then these charts are looking quite encouraging, I think.
Have a quick look at the UKMO then, because the 12 of that should have come out now. Have you seen this one yet?
I've not seen any of the models tonight, so I was holding off looking at them for the live stream.
The interesting thing is, if I was to copy and paste that into one of these weather forms, for example, and then gave no information about what the conditions were, let's say I wouldn't even know it was November, and I was to look at that chart, I would be very excited about it, because I think in some situations that chart could be extremely cold and snowy. I mean, it isn't in this situation, but it could be.
Certainly in the sort of midwinter, that would have been very interesting chart indeed.
It's unfortunate these things don't happen at the right time of year, isn't it, really?
A long time since we had a real easterly in the middle of January.
You get a lot of these focused cold easterlies, don't you? Where you just don't tap into any real cold air, so they're always a bit disappointing. I don't really think there's much. There's such a thing as an unimpressive northerly. I think northerlies are sort of your safe bet. If you're going to get a northerly, it's going to be cold. It might not be very cold, but it's going to be cold enough for snow. Whereas if you get an easterly, it might be cold enough for snow.
The only problem with northerlies, of course, is that for people in the south, it tends not to deliver. A lot of the time, northerlies don't deliver all that much snow because they're sheltered from the northerly winds. So you tend to get snow showers draped around the coast, whereas in an easterly, the showers can penetrate inland much easier. But like you say, northerlies tend to be colder than easterlies on average, but easterlies can be the coldest in the right synoptic. So it swings and roundabouts, I suppose, really.
I guess the almost ideal one is to combine the two and have a northeasterly. They're a lot safer than easterlies in that you don't often get these folks cold northeasterlies. Northeasterlies are generally cold, but you tend to get more widespread snow away from these northern and eastern facing coasts with northeasterlies.
And the great thing about northeasterlies is that they feed the snow showers down the Washington, Northamptonshire, where I am. So I'm always in favour of northeasterlies.
Well, I mean, another interesting one direction is the northwesterly, because we don't talk about these very often, I guess, because I guess just in general, most of the population doesn't live in the northwest. But the interesting thing about northwesterlies is if you live in Northern Ireland, that's the wind direction that you want, because easterlies are not that great for Northern Ireland. You might get a few snow showers, but even in a really cold easterly, the cold air doesn't often get as far to the west of Northern Ireland. But if you get a really cold northwesterly, then you can get real blizzards, and I mean you can get thunderstorm in Northern Ireland during northwesterlies. But if you get a northwesterly, you're not going to see any snow in London.
No, that's right. The Christmas Day snow event of 2004, the north and the west. I think that was a northwesterly that delivered quite a nice Christmas Day to sort of northwestern parts of the country, but very little in the south and the southeast with that one, I think.
Is it just me, or is the UKMO a little bit better than the GFS?
Yeah, I think the UK met at where are we there? 144, aren't we? So yeah, that looks a little bit colder. The alignment of the block and the trough in the Atlantic just a little bit better, feeding something a little bit colder. I would have thought there.
You can get a 168 hour UKMO, can't you? But I can't remember where you can get that from. I know you can get it from.
I'm not sure.
You can get it from somewhere. I better look that up for next time. What other models we have? We have the arpege, which is quite good, but it's short term. I think it is slightly better actually than the 6Z. And then we also have the GEM, which can often exaggerate things a little bit. There we go. Talk about it. There we go.
That's the best.
Of course, the GEM goes for it, then, doesn't it? But I mean, this is the GEM we're talking about, so I can't say I'm too surprised about that.
That's right. But then again, it's a little bit better than it was a few years ago. I think it's not as bad. I mean, that's not saying much, but it isn't as bad, I don't think, as it was sort of 5 or 6 years ago. But again, it's not the most reliable, most definitely.
Well, if we're going for joke models, then we can have a quick look at the NAV gem. The sort of wooden spoon of weather model, so to speak. And again, that one's going for quite a cold situation as well. So I'm not really sure we should be too optimistic when the worst model seems to be going for the coldest conditions. What about the GMA? Actually, I don't think the GMA is run yet, has it?
No, that's the last one to update, I think, in the evening.
We still get up to 84, but we won't get until after the ECM to get the others. This one's quite interesting. It's the slowest update, so we're still looking at the zeros there, but it's sort of, I think it runs at quite a high resolution out to 240 hours, so this can always be an interesting one to have a quick look at. But I think this is a little bit like the GEM in that it tends to over-exaggerate cold. You can see that one's going for...
That one looks good, doesn't it? Snow showers with that.
Look at the 850s. That one would be cold for snow showers, wouldn't it?
Snow showers in the north and the east, yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, it's pity that the good models aren't really going for it, but the ECM is quite encouraging.
The ECM will be updating from 6 till 7, so before we go, I suppose we can have a quick look at that.
Hasn't started yet. I suppose maybe we should have a bit of an intermission then for questions, if you like, and then go through them.
I'll check Gav's other bits and social media in a moment, but I have got a question. So I've got a question from, this was email, I've got a question from Mark Kanish asking if high pressure doesn't go to Greenland this time, does that mean it won't go to Greenland or winter? Certainly not. So it's encouraging signs, I think, that we're already seeing high pressure trying to go to Greenland this early in the season. As we've already explained, it would typically be a westerly time of the year. So the fact that we're already seeing high pressure trying to get to Greenland, even if it fails, I think these are encouraging signals, possibly for later in the winter. Although, having said that, you never know, because of course we had tremendous amounts of Greenland blocking in December 2010, but then when it went to Christmas, never really came back. So you can never know, but I would think this is a reasonably good sign for the winter, but we're already trying to see blocking. And Mark also asks, will the cold AMO, Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, help to get us cold winters? So the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation is an oscillation of sea surface temperature anomalies. It changes every sort of 20-25 years, favoring either cold or warmer Atlantic sea surface temperature anomalies. We've been in a warm phase of the AMO from around 1995 to recent years. We are moving into the cold phase of the AMO now. We might not necessarily be fully in the cold phase of the AMO. That might not happen until the 2020s, but we are moving that way. The last time we was in the cold AMO was kind of like mid 1960s to mid 1990s, And so that period from the mid-1960s, mid-1990s had differing periods of cold and mild winters. So obviously, just because we're going into the cold MO, that does not guarantee that we'll be getting cold winters. Cold Atlantic does not guarantee that we'll get cold winters. I would suspect we'll continue to get our traditional mix of mainly mild winters with just the occasional cold one thrown in, because that's what happened when we was in the last cold AMO phase. Just looking at Gav's weather leads to see if we've got any questions at Gav's weather leads. So I'll scroll down, and Stanny is asking us what do we think is causing these abnormal weather patterns, and do we think that these weather patterns will remain abnormal through the winter? So as far as what's causing it, it's very difficult to know what's been causing these weather patterns that we've had. Obviously, we have the southern stratospheric warming in February, which was followed by the period of abnormal weather patterns that we are still seemingly in. But I don't think the southern stratospheric warming itself would be having any real impact on the weather patterns now. So it could be, I mean, there's no way of knowing really. We're close to solar minimum, so that tends to favour northern blocking when you're in solar minimum. We've been in a very strong and prolonged easterly QBO, so that might be favouring these abnormal weather patterns as well. So very difficult to know. And whether these weather patterns will remain abnormal into winter, that also is quite difficult to know, because as I said, in December 2010, we had a high level of blocking in that December, northern blocking, but then it went away and it never really came back. So the February of 2011 was very mild and quite Atlantic driven. So we're just going to wait and see and play it day by day, I think, to see how long these abnormal weather patterns will last for. Harry is asking us, do we think that the greatest cold potential will be early or late in the winter, taking into account the models, possible southern stratospheric warming and ENSO? So, Harry, with that one, we can't say too much because we'll be giving away the winter forecast, but certainly it looks like we're going to be starting off quite interesting with the weather patterns. We've established that up to the beginning of December, we remain pretty blocked. There's no sign up to the early part of December that we're going into a prolonged westerly phase. So, early winter looks interesting, but whether that's the most interesting part of the winter is it remains to be seen. John Connell is asking, are we setting up a pattern that could create a cold and wintry December? Certainly, if the blocking goes far enough north and hangs around long enough, then again, you wouldn't rule out a cold December by any means. Shiram is asking, I would like to ask why southern stratospheric warming events are more common in late winter and February rather than December, and are any factors that determine whether we get cold air or not in the Northern Hemisphere? So I'm not sure about why they tend to happen later in the winter. I suppose the factors that cause southern stratospheric warming probably increase through the course of the winter. But that's
I think you have to have an established polar vortex, don't you, to get a southern stratospheric warming event. As far as I'm aware, the warming itself is caused by a rapid deceleration of upper level winds. So essentially, most of the time you have these strong westerly winds that occur at high latitudes in the stratosphere. And the stratospheric warming is caused by a rapid deceleration of these winds from westerly, and then, of course, they become easterly. And it's this deceleration that causes warming. So my gut instinct would be that you would be able to get a stronger deceleration when the polar vortex is more well established, which is going to be the case later in the winter, because early in the winter your polar vortex is going to be weaker, so your westerly winds are going to be less strong, which means if they decelerate, then they're going to decelerate at a slower rate. So this is just a guess, but based on intuition, that's kind of what I would think. I'm not sure though.
It sounds good to me. And the interesting fact about this winter is that the CFS is regularly forecasting some sort of sudden stratospheric warming event, or some sort of warming of the stratosphere anyway, to be taking place quite early on this winter, sometime through sort of early mid to late December, which is quite early in the winter. That doesn't normally it doesn't normally happen quite that early. Brendan is asking us about, isn't it now evident we're entering a grand solar minimum, and the jet streams have been out of flow now for many months since February. So there's been a lot of speculation about grand solar minimum. Certainly, we are in an abnormal phase of the solar cycle. I mean, we've had a very weak solar cycle number 24. Certainly, we are at solar minimum. In a very small number of forecasts for solar cycle number 25. Normally, by now, NASA and a few of the agencies would have produced some forecasts for solar cycle 25, but I've not seen anything coming out of NASA about the next solar cycle. So what's going on there, I'm not sure. But certainly we have had a very unusual solar cycle for number 24, and obviously we are at solar minimum now, and that does increase our chance in Europe of blocking in the winter. Chris is asking, Gav, what are your thoughts on the GFS operational and parallel runs, as they seem to be quite a difference, which do we favour? So for anyone that doesn't know, the GFS has its operational run, it has its ensembles, and it also has a parallel run, and that's where the GFS will get an upgrade every year. They upgrade the GFS model, and for a few months they run the upgraded version in parallel with the operational GFS. So you will think that the parallel, and of course, obviously, the parallel run becomes the operational GFS after it's gone through its transitional period. You will think that the upgraded model would be the most accurate, but I doubt there's very much in it really. And I would think that the changes you see between the operational and the parallel GFS are purely just the different scenarios playing out within the model. So when you're in a very blocked situation, the model will struggle to play around with lots of different scenarios about how quickly that blocking goes away. And I think the difference is that you're seeing there between the operational and the parallel, and indeed between the operational and its ensembles, are probably just related to the weather pattern, really. So I don't think you can say that one, the operational is better than the parallel, or the parallel is particularly better with this than the operational.
I definitely agree with that. Although actually, it's a good opportunity to, after we finish this, to actually go and have a look at the parallel, because that will give some useful information. But I would agree with what you're saying. I would kind of treat it as a high resolution ensemble more than anything else.
That's right.
I think in theory you would expect the parallel one to be better because it is the upgraded version of the model. In theory.
In theory, yeah.
But in practice, I've had a look at the verification stats of the parallel compared to the operational. I think this is always the case with the GFS. The GFS doesn't really improve. I haven't noticed any sort of substantial improvement in the GFS for a while. Maybe in the last couple of years. What I would say is, if the ECMWF brings out a parallel run, that's something to get excited by. But I wouldn't be. I mean, I remember the last year, I think it was, that we had the parallel run out for the Beast and the East. I don't think it performed any better than the operational. I think it actually might have performed slightly worse. So yeah, the parallel run really doesn't excite me. It would excite me if it was the ECM. Yeah.
The parallel and the operational all swing around with various scenarios when you've got these blocking patterns in place, I think. So,
like I say, it's just probably just treat it as another high resolution ensemble. It's better than the ensembles in the sense that it's run at the same resolution as the operational GFS. So it's probably more useful than individual perturbations. But I think we should definitely look at it just to see what it's just to see what particular scenario it's going for.
Yeah. Andy is asking, Gavin Quantum, do you think we will see a major snow event this winter? So you can never tell whether you're going to get a snow event in any particular winter, but obviously with the amount of blocking, the unusual weather patterns we've got at the moment, you will probably favour a major snow event at some point through this winter. But again, it depends whether the blocking goes away very quickly. It could do. It did in 2010, but I've got a feeling we'll have at least some I think we'll have at least some quite significant snow at some point this winter. I put my neck on the block a little bit there, but I think at some point this winter we are likely, given the way the weather patterns have been very unusual. I think we're quite likely to see quite a significant snow situation at some point this winter. Jackie's asking when the highest probability of the southern stratospheric warming is for this winter. So, Jack, typically you would expect southern stratospheric warmings to be later in the winter. As I say, this year, unusually, it appears that the CFS, anyway, which isn't a particularly good model, but it does appear that the CFS is hinting that we'll get that southern stratospheric warming a little bit earlier, maybe in the middle to that part of December. But we should wait and see. It could be, but it's off on a tangent with that. Siren is asking, Gav and Quantum, does the UK Met Office methodology of Atlantic sea surface temperature profiles and the NEO confuse you? I sometimes don't really get it, especially with the cold AMO periods. Yes, Siren, it is quite confusing, the idea of the tripole, the warm over cold over warm sea surface temperature anomalies that's supposed to favour a negative North Atlantic Ocean is pretty confusing. And what always confuses me most about that is why May is particularly favoured over any other month. I've never really been able to.
I don't actually think. I think the decision to use May is actually quite arbitrary. Actually, I think it may be because it has for some reason has a higher statistical correlation.
But I think
just because something has a higher, but I think just because something has a higher statistical correlation doesn't necessarily mean there's any reason for it. Sometimes it could just be chance. Because
let's say that there's about a 1 in 3 success rate with that methodology.
The sea surface temperature method is actually quite good compared to other long range forecasting methods. It's one of the better ones to use. But I think it's still, I might be wrong about this, but I think it's still more reliable to use recent sea surface temperatures over ones back in May. I might be wrong about that.
I always use it as the starting point for my winter forecast when my winter forecast updates and the winter forecast itself. When I do the NAO forecast in the summer, it's always like the first step on the journey, if you like. But I certainly won't be basing a winter forecast on that one sole methodology. Certainly not. Finally, for Gav Levis, Haley is asking, can you get snow in a westerly flow? So yeah, if it's cold enough, definitely northern and western parts of the country can get snow in a westerly. It's quite unusual for that to happen in the south and the southeast, but northern and western parts of the country, if you get a particularly cold air mass coming out of Greenland, yeah, you can definitely get snow in the north and west from a westerly flow.
You can get snow in a southwesterly. And then the last time that there was quite snowy southwesterlies was in 2014, which I think that entire winter was dominated by cold southwesterlies. Of course, 2014 wasn't a particularly snowy year for most of us because the winds were in the southwest. But the interesting thing about that year was that for the southwest of Ireland, for like places like Cork, which are sort of the warmest places in the British Isles, there was a very much above average snow for these sorts of parts. So I mean, when I say returning southwesterlies, what I mean by that is I mean southwesterly winds that have origins in Canada rather than from the Azores. So what you typically get is you get a westerly flow from Canada that drops down into lower latitudes and then comes back up again. Those are called returning southwesterlies. And returning southwesterlies are typically quite cold, but almost always not cold enough for snow. But sometimes if you get really intense cold over Canada, they can actually sometimes be cold enough for snow in the extreme west. And the odd thing about them is that for parts of southwestern Ireland, they are actually the best sorts of setups for snow because southwestern Ireland is such a warm place in the British Isles that you don't get snow very often there. So you can even get snow on southwesterly winds. You can get snow from pretty much any wind direction, but some more likely than others, of course.
That's right. I remember January 1984 was a very unusual month in that it was really quite a cold month. There's quite a lot of snow. It was a very westerly month due to and the cold and the snow was due to unusually cold air moving across the Atlantic from Canada, which is quite unusual.
I mean, I will point out this is not something you should be hoping for because westerly based cold it tends to be fleeting, tends to be temporary, and it tends to not be that deep. Even if you do get snow from a westerly, and you are going to have to probably be in western parts of the UK to benefit from this. But even if you do get snow from a westerly, it's not going to stick around for very long. So these are not patterns you should be hoping for to make this. If you're a snow lover, these are not patterns to bet on, really.
North and east is always going to be the two wind directions, and northeast most of all. On Twitter, Cheney is asking us what's the likelihood of seeing some snow in the lowland southeast of England. So in the next week to 10 days, virtually no chance of seeing snow in lowland southeast England, Cheney. In the more extended range, though, over the winter, obviously, the further into winter we get, the greater the chance will be that we could get some snow down in the southeast. Running down through the comments. So Richard Brown is asking us what are the winning numbers for next week's lottery. Not sure about that, Richard. Moving along, we shall see Philip O'Malley. Are we heading for a white Christmas? So, well, that's going to be a very interesting question, isn't it? If we keep these blocking areas of high pressure to the north, the chances of a white Christmas will obviously be increasing. But again, it could be that we have blocking going on for the first half of December, and then it all goes away. In the second half of December, we have a mild Christmas. You just never know. I'm also being asked, what is the Met Office referring to in its long-range forecast? You might have to read on the live stream, so I'm not sure what that's referring to. Whether that's probably referring to the 30-day UK Met forecast, I would have thought. Franz is asking, does the combination of the QBO changing to westerly, the El Nino getting a bit stronger, and the proximity to solar minimum suggest a colder or warmer winter? The models seem in a flux a bit, and after 5 winters in Austria, I'm hoping for my first white Christmas. So the QBO is moving into its westerly phase from the prolonged easy phase that it has been in. That transition probably favours rather more of a milder winter, but again, there are many westerly QBO winters that deviate from that theory anyway.
I'm interested, just on a slightly tangential point. Do you even want easterlies in Austria? I mean, maybe you do. I'm just not sure, because I mean, like, for example, for Norway, you don't. If you want cold and snow in Norway, you don't want easterlies. Easterlies are actually a relatively less cold direction for places like Norway. I mean, Austria, of course, is a lot further south than Norway, so maybe you do for Austria, but.
I think Franz is talking about the easterly and westerly QBO, quasi-biennial oscillation, which is one of the weather drivers. So,
but he was talking about, wasn't he saying about snow? It was going to Austria and was asking about that.
Yeah, he lives in Austria and he has had white Christmas for 5 years. Anyway, so the westerly change from the easterly to westerly QBO will tend to favour rather milder winter for Europe. But the El Nino getting a little bit stronger as well, although it's going to be a weak tomorrow, El Nino.
To be honest, with the I don't really value the El Nino at all as being a predictor of UK. I mean,
unless it gets very strong. If
was that 2015 winter, which was ridiculously mild, wasn't it, because of that really strong El Nino?
Yeah, if you get it very strong, and it's the same is true of La Nina. Get them very strong, then it's normally bad news. But I
think a flip into a slight positive El Nino is really kind of trivial in comparison with some of the other factors. So I wouldn't rate the El Nino going positive as being anything for or against a cold winter, to be honest. So I would kind of just be tempted to ignore that completely.
And then the solar minimum, so that favours normal blocking, as we know. And then going further down for Twitter. So
have you looked at Arctic sea ice? Because I think that's an interesting factor, because the Atlantic sea ice this year has been quite low in comparison. I think actually the summer Arctic, the winter Arctic sea ice at the moment in the Atlantic sector is comparable to the summer Arctic sea ice about 10 years ago. So I'd have thought low Arctic sea ice in the Atlantic sector would promote high pressure forming in sort of the Barents Sea, which would be quite good for northeasterlies.
I think that's definitely the theory with that. Max is asking what causes snow showers to form over the North Sea, and also
lake effect, isn't it? I mean, it's quite shallow convection, but essentially the principle behind it is you have extremely cold air running over a relatively warm sea, and the warm air next to the sea surface is buoyant within the cold air mass. So you get these buoyant plumes of warm air that rise into this cold environment, and then of course you get convection due to that. And then when you get sort of it's sort of an incremental effect. So initially you get the buoyancy due to the cold air, but then you also get a rise in relative humidity, which encourages even more convection. So there's these moist effects that come into play as well. But the convection that you get over the North Sea is quite shallow compared to the thunderstorms that you get in the summer. But you can still get very vigorous sort of convection coming from the lake effect. I call it the lake effect incidentally because the lake effect is most well known over Canada, where you get cold winds moving over a warm lake, which causes a similar sort of situation.
Yeah, Max is also asking whether the beast from the east was lake effect snow.
Oh yeah, definitely. But the disadvantage with the beast from the east was that it happened in March, which is not the best time for the lake effect to happen, because even though the air was extremely cold, it was unbelievably cold actually in the 850 level. Again, we talked about -16 earlier, but the sea surface temperatures in March are quite cold as well. I think March, April is sort of when the sea's at its coldest. So the lake effect was not as strong as it could have been. So actually, in fact, if you want a really good lake effect snow event, you want the cold snap to happen as early in the year as possible. So you want late. So the reason that 2010 was so memorable was also partly because it happened in late November, early December, when the sea surface temperature was actually still quite warm. And that's why you had such heavy and violent snow showers. It's also why you had thunder snow, because you combined an unusually cold air mass with a still relatively warm sea. So the story with lake effect is the earlier the better. You want it happening basically certainly before February. By the time you get to February, the lake effect is going to be quite weak. You want it to happen mid-January or earlier for a good lake effect, usually.
That's right. Elijah's asking if we get a sun stratospheric warming in December, could January 2019 have a CET below freezing? So haven't had one of those for a very long time, and you would tend to say probably not. But then again, as December 2010 showed, you can never rule anything out. And Julian, finally for Twitter, is asking, do you think we could be in for a snowy few weeks? So certainly not in the next 2 weeks. If the blocking was to continue further into the winter, then you wouldn't be ruling out that possibility. But at the moment, definitely, there's no sign of anything particularly snowy, as we've already established, in the next 2 weeks. I'm just looking at Facebook, as well as his Facebook page. So let's see whether we've got anything coming up here. Facebook's always really slow to load for some reason.
I'm just having a quick look through some of the live chats. I'm not noticing that many questions. So again, if you want to post questions on the YouTube chat, that's also a place that you can do it. But I'm not noticing being tagged relatively recently. I think it's just some discussion going on in there about some of the things that we've been talking about. But I'll keep monitoring the chat and see if anything comes up there.
Okay, on Facebook, Pat Carl is asking, what winter will this one match? So all winters, all seasons are individual and unique, but they do sometimes come out fairly close to other winters. And in terms of what winter this winter will match, it'd be interesting to see, actually, because when we do winter forecast, we will bring part of the forecast will be bringing analogues together. So it will be interesting to see which winters come out as our best analogues for this year based on the GASWEB's winter forecast methodology. That will be interesting to see. Victor is asking, so he's asking, by the looks of it, there will not be enough rain to top up the low water table and reservoir levels. If this does turn out to be a dry winter and we follow up with another hot summer in 2019, how could it get drought wise? I'm not sure about that, actually, but I know that a lot of the reservoirs and the river levels are still very low from the summer. We haven't really had consistent, autumn rainfall yet. So I'm not sure how bad it will get. I'm not an expert, but I would imagine that if we was to have a dry winter and a dry spring and a hot summer, and there's a lot of ifs and buts there, so we've got to go through a lot to get to a hot summer after a dryish autumn, after a dry winter, and after a dry spring, and after a hot summer before. That takes a lot of doing to be able to do that. But if we did get 2019 in the summer and it was hot and dry, then we would definitely be in a drought, I would have thought. But how bad it would be, you'd have to ask somebody from the Environment Agency really how bad that would get. Of course, we did go through a long run in the middle of the 1970s, from 1974 to 1976, of very dry, not only hot and dry summers in 75 and 76, but also what made that drought so bad was that all the other seasons were very dry as well. So there was a very dry winter in 74, 75, and another very dry winter in 75, 76, and the autumns and the springs were quite dry as well. So it was all a cumulative effect that finished up with that very, very serious drought in 1976. I doubt we would see anything as bad as 1976. Because the water companies claim that the way they capture the water now is so much better, the way they store it and all of that kind of thing. So I doubt we would see anything as bad as 76. But again, you would have to ask somebody from the Environment Agency how bad a drought could get if we went from the hot summer through a dry autumn, through a dry winter, through a dry spring, and finished up with another hot and dry summer. And Chris is also asking, so there is still an opportunity for the high over Greenland, and if that happens, it would be cold. It would be as cold as, would it be as cold as we first thought? So Chris, we've established that there's a lot of uncertainty by day 10. Several of the, particularly the ECMWF ensemble members, wanted to keep that high pressure relatively close to Greenland. So I think it's just going to be a case of watch this space. It may be, as I said before, it may be with this high pressure, this blocking, it may be something or it may be nothing. We're just going to have to wait and see over the next week or two. But certainly I wouldn't be ruling anything out with the weather patterns as unusual as they are at the moment.
There's a couple of questions on the chat. So someone's asking, will it be an unseasonably mild winter? Again, I don't want to be in your long range forecast, but there's nothing that would suggest to me that it is going to be unseasonably mild. But an unseasonably mild winter is probably more common now than it was a couple of decades ago. So
yeah, so with the blocking pattern, it can be a blessing or a curse really for cold or mild weather. So if a block was to happen to set up in a situation that was bringing up a lot of southerly winds, if we found ourselves on the mild side of the block, then we could conceivably get a mild or a very mild winter. But
I think it would be quite unusual to get a lot of mild weather from a block pattern, though, because a lot of the most mild weather would happen sort of from a pattern where you get low pressure to the north and high pressure to the south. Or I mean, blocking in the sense that you've got blocking over Europe. I mean, that would be very mild.
Yeah, that's right. If that block was to set up somewhere over the Alps or something, then yeah, that could be a very mild winter.
Yeah, I think a mild winter is definitely possible. I mean, just because it's going to be cold in the foreseeable future doesn't necessarily mean we can't flip to an Atlantic, a very much Atlantic-driven pattern. I mean, all these winter forecasts, there's going to be a probabilistic element. It may well be that the factors do to some degree favour a colder than average winter. But on the other hand, even if the factors somewhat favour a colder than average winter, there's probably still a quite significant chance, let's say 45%, that the winter's still going to be milder than average. I mean, actually, if you look at the Met Office forecasts, when the Met Office predicts a milder than average winter, for example, they still only predict it with something like a 60% probability of a milder than average winter. Or if they predict a colder than average winter, they predict it with something like a 60% probability. That still means there's a 40% chance that the opposite will happen. Because of course, predicting these sort of long range forecasts is still quite an unreliable field. So
That's right. In our part of the world, you can never, ever, 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 ever rule out a mild winter because it's just our default setup. Having said that, certainly we've established there's no sign of anything particularly strong with the westerly flow up to the beginning of December. So it looks like
I mean, I would say based on what I've seen, I think a cold winter is slightly more likely than not. But that should be caveated with the fact that if we did get a mild winter, it wouldn't. I mean, again, you could kind of argue that I'm hedging my bets here by saying, okay, it's probably going to be a cold winter, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to be a mild winter, and to some extent that it is true. But on the other hand, it's just so difficult to predict the weather 3 months in advance. So you're always, to some degree, going to be hedging your bets on what the conditions are going to be like. I think the only thing that we can say with any real degree of certainty is that the next few weeks are going to be very cold, and that the pattern in a broad sense does look favourable over, let's say, the next month to be colder than average. I think we can be reasonably sure about that. But insofar as the winter itself is concerned, maybe the factors favour a somewhat colder than average winter. But beyond that, I think it's difficult to say.
It's a very difficult winter to forecast this because we've got competing factors again, as we seem to get quite a lot over the recent years. So you'll find out in 2 weeks what we're forecasting.
Well, I guess with your westerly QBO, doesn't not particularly favourable in that sense. But then you've got other factors that seem to favour it. So
that's right.
Yeah. Any other questions? I'm just looking through the chat. There's a few more coming through. Sometimes when people tag me, I see an orange band, and sometimes I don't, which seems to. Yeah, so a few people asking. Someone's asking me to rate the winter out of 10. Actually, I mean, if I had to rate wintry conditions so far, then I'd actually rate it pretty high, because I mean, getting October, any form of October snow is unusual. Like I say, the only two examples I remember are 2008 and 2012. So to see any snow by this point is still very, very good. And in fact, actually, isn't this our earliest ever live stream that we've done? I think we might have done a few summer ones for like heat waves and stuff, but isn't this our earliest ever winter type live stream?
I can't remember, but I think certainly for winter, yeah, I think this is our.
I remember we have done a few heatwave type live streams, but if we just ignore those, I think this is the earliest live stream that we've ever done. I mean, that in itself should be indicative that things are actually looking pretty good for cold weather lovers. Yeah, I think most of the questions in the live chat just seem to be sort of broad questions about what the winter is going to be like. We can do it. I mean, I don't know how much you want to look at with regards to long range weather forecasting stuff, because it will, you don't want to ruin your long range forecast. But I don't know.
I think we better hedge our bets a little bit on that and wait until we've got because we haven't got all the information in yet. Anyway, still got one more winter update to do next week. Then we've also got one more seasonal model roundup to do for the winter. Which will be on Saturday. And then we've got to put all of those winter updates and the long range models together and just see how they come out. What we have said already is that the weather patterns are abnormal. We have got blocking as we begin the winter, which is an encouraging sign for anybody that wants a cold winter. But beyond that, if I was to give a definitive forecast now before I've seen all of the evidence put together, then I'd just be guessing, really, and I don't want to lead anybody astray. So I don't think we can answer that question. Will this be a cold winter? We've established that the drivers of the weather, the QBO, for example, and snow activity are competing.
Just a quite specific point. This is more just my own personal interest, but there was quite an interesting hurricane season this year. And one in particular stood out, the Hurricane Leslie, which sort of meandered around the Northern Atlantic for a while. And actually, I think I actually did a video on this at the time because it was such an interesting storm. But it was still hurricane status, a couple of 100 miles off the coast of Spain, which is unbelievably rare for that sort of thing to happen. But the upshot of that, the point I'm making in general terms, is that there was this storm in the Northern Atlantic that was due to upwelling of cold water, was cooling the sea surface temperatures, and because it was there for so long, it was having quite a large effect. The only point I'm making here is that wouldn't it be interesting if this one single tropical cyclone, Hurricane Leslie, actually had a causal impact on the winter that we're going to get? I mean, obviously, you wouldn't be able to tell whether it was responsible, but I think it's kind of interesting that this one particular storm could potentially have such a large impact on our winter.
There is the theory, and we do include hurricane and tropical storm activity from the Atlantic in winter updates, because there is the theory that the transportation of warmth from the tropics through to the mid latitudes and ultimately into the northern latitudes. If you get lots of heat being transported from the tropics through the mid latitudes to the northern latitudes, can eventually, if you get lots of that going on, can eventually increase your risk of blocking. So it is one of the things we look at. And actually, I think, without giving anything away, the 12th and final winter update on Sunday next week, I think we might have a little look at hurricane and tropical storm activity in that one. We've been focusing on how many storms we've been getting, but we haven't really looked at this season in depth, what it could mean for the winter. So I think that would be an avenue we might be exploring actually for the 12th.
Well, definitely want to give a shout out to Hurricane Leslie there for being such an interesting storm.
So should we carry on with a few more questions, or would you like?
If you've got a few more questions, we can quickly go through them. Because I think the main thing that we're going to do after this is have a look at the ECM, which is the most important model anyway. So we won't need that much time for that. But
that's in the middle of its update now, isn't it? So in about 20 minutes, that should be more or less fully updated. So we've got Andy asking, is it true that the GFS cannot handle the Atlantic energy very well? So I think the GFS isn't too bad when it's in a westerly zonal pattern. I'm not sure the GFS is all that good in handling blocking though. But then again, I'm not sure any of the models are particularly good at handling blocking either. So all of the models become more unreliable when the pattern is doing something unusual. Tom is asking a very involved question. As NASA has reported a very anomalous thermosphere cooling and shrinkage, could this probably be affecting when an stratospheric warming will occur? So I don't really know anything about that. Do you know anything about that, Quantum?
Oh, so can you just repeat the question?
NASA apparently has reported an anomalous thermosphere cooling and shrinkage.
Okay.
And Tom is asking whether this could this probably be affecting when a sudden stratospheric warming will occur. So I assume Tom is asking whether this is perhaps causing the idea that we'll have an early sudden stratospheric warming in December, which is quite unusual.
I mean, my gut instinct is no, and the reason for that is that the thermosphere is the thermosphere is above the stratosphere, isn't it? It has a very low pressure. When you run these numerical weather predictions, when you run these weather models, you typically have a lower resolution the higher up you go, because the vertical resolution matters less the further up you are in the atmosphere, because there's less of a direct effect. So by the time you get into the stratosphere, your resolution is fairly low anyway, but it's still a hell of a lot higher than it is in the thermosphere. Because and the reason for that is because it doesn't need to be as high. So I guess my general answer to this question is that the further up you go, the less impact things are going to have in general. And I am not aware of the thermosphere having any major impact on us in the troposphere. And I know the stratosphere can have an impact on us with the whole sudden stratospheric warming thing. But even then, the stratosphere generally doesn't even affect us in the troposphere. So my gut instinct, but I might be wrong on this, is to say I can't imagine the thermosphere has much of an impact on what's going on in the troposphere. That's just my gut instinct based on the low vertical resolution that happens in these numerical weather prediction models anyway. So that's my gut instinct.
Haley is asking, so just for fun, what's both of your thoughts for winter 2018-19? So Haley, I've already established that I can't tell you what I'm forecasting for 2018-19 yet, because I don't know myself, but we can turn it over to Quantum to see what Quantum thinks this winter.
haven't looked at any. I mean, I've only looked at a few factors. I know I don't look at the long range stuff in as much detail as you do. So it'll be interesting to see your forecast. The again, the factors that I've noticed through my own interest have been the unusual hurricane season that we've had this year, which I think is somewhat favourable towards a colder winter. I was looking at the Northern Hemisphere snow cover as well, and I believe that's pretty good. Although there was an unusual start where most of the snow cover was concentrated in the Americas, which actually would suggest a milder winter, because when you get a lot of cold air forming in the Americas, that sort of strengthens the jet stream when that cold air moves over the warm sea. But I think now it seems to have switched more over towards Siberia and Russia, so not so sure. And then again, the Arctic sea ice factor with the very low Atlantic sea ice sector. Again, that sort of promotes high pressure forming in the Barents Sea, basically just as it's sort of doing now. So again, I haven't comprehensively looked at these things, but if I had to guess, I would suggest that I'd favour a slightly colder than average winter, but I don't feel confident about that prediction at all.
Yeah, that's right. So Dan is asking, how come low pressure does develop when how come low pressure or a trough does develop when cold easterly winds are across Europe? So I think Dan's talking about sort of a trough developing or a low pressure developing over the North Sea, perhaps over Germany or the North Sea, when the winds are coming in from the east. That would be purely typically down to the instability of the easterly wind. Brendan is asking about the snow in Greece that they've had recently. Apparently, they've had some very early snowfalls down across Greece, and I know that's one of the things that drives people on the forums absolutely crazy when they see snow turning up in Athens and places like that, and the UK is bathed in a mild sort of southwesterly wind, so we will see whether the snow is evenly distributed or not, or whether it all finishes up down in Greece again. And Mark also is asking about the terms wave 1 and wave 2 when referring to the jet stream or the polar vortex.
Is he asking what they mean?
Yeah, can you explain what the use of terms wave 1 and 2 refer to when talking about the jet stream or the polar vortex?
Well, I think in sort of wave terminology, they refer to wave numbers, which is related to the frequency of the wave. So for these sun-stratospheric warming events, I think you're looking at geopotential heights fairly high up in the atmosphere, where you have sort of troughs and ridges. And I think wave 1 is referring to a wave which has a wave number of 1. So you would essentially just have a monopolar type pattern. A wave number of 2, I think, means that you have something like trough, ridge, and then a wave number of 3 would mean trough, ridge, trough, ridge, trough, ridge. I'm hoping that I'm trying. I'm not sure if that's clear, but the higher the wave number, the higher the frequency of the wave. So you have more of these ridges and troughs in a wave with a higher wave number. I think that's the basic idea behind it.
That sounds good to me. So I think that's all of the questions for Gaz weather beats at the moment.
Do you think there's enough running now to have a look through the ECM? I mean, it will have at least partially run. We probably can comment on it as we're going through.
There's also the parallel GFS.
Oh yeah, we can have a quick look at the parallel. If there's no more questions, we can do that. I can't see any more questions on the chat. Should we do that then?
Yeah, we'll have a look at the GFS parallel and then the EC.
Okay, I'm just going to get the screen share back up. Okay, I've got the parallel up. Actually, can people see that?
I can.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to run quickly through this. I mean, same sort of thing. We've got these high geopotential heights around Iceland. It's not ideal. We really want them to be towards Greenland, and you can see also they're declining. So the yellow colours are disappearing, and we can see the greens and the blues appearing, and you can see that the high pressure is sort of collapsing towards Europe. So again, I don't think there's much difference here between the parallel and the operational run. Maybe the parallel is slightly colder than the operational, but it's more of the same really. From what I'm, and we've still got this idea of this area of low pressure coming into the cold air, so that could be interesting, depending on the exact situation when we get to that. Just go a little bit further through it. Yeah, and actually the parallel seems to be going for more of an Atlantic-driven pattern later on in the run.
Trying to raise the heights to the south there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's not particularly good for people that want cold weather. But it's so far ahead, I wouldn't take too much notice of that. But
very long way out.
I think the parallel and the operational are fairly similar. Shall we go and have a look at the ECM then?
Yeah, we'll finish with the ECM.
Okay. Bit of a spoiler alert there. So we can see the pattern for Monday and Tuesday. I think it's basically what we said earlier, with this sort of quite impressive looking easterly on a superficial L, but in reality there's no really enough cold air to be embedded in this. And then the sort of decline in the higher pressure later on in the week. This is Thursday. I think it's a little bit better than the GFS actually. Because when I was on net weather, the net weather uses a slightly different colour scheme. So yellow on net weather is equivalent to sort of the greeny yellow colour on here. And I think the 552 line is sort of this sort of bright green band here. So you can see sort of by 144 hours, we've actually still got this 552 line over Greenland, which is slightly more optimistic than, if you like, cold weather than what the GFS was showing, I believe. Yeah,
that looks a little bit better for blocking because it's just that tad further north, isn't it?
Indeed. Of course, the 0Z was quite a lot better than the GFS, and its ensembles were looking a lot better as well. You can still see actually where the really cold air is. You can see the really cold air sort of up here on this sort of northeasterly wind. And it's not that far away. I mean, actually, sort of the Northern Isles are actually somewhat starting to get affected by it. So this is not a bad chance at all, really.
No, that's right. It's certainly having a go, getting some proper Arctic air through, isn't it?
Let's have a look at 192. That's pretty damn close, actually. It's not an ideal pattern, but on the other hand, we do have the 552 line over Greenland, so we've got high geopotential heights over Greenland, much higher pressure. Because you can remember the GFS had these higher geopotential heights sort of declining. I mean, they are declining, but they had them also sort of collapsing and moving in a sort of southeastward direction, whereas this is moving in a more northwestward direction. So it's almost the opposite of what the GFS was showing, and consequently, we've actually got this much colder northeasterly flow starting to affect northern Scotland. So that's actually quite good.
It looks like the northeasters are digging into central and northern Scotland there, doesn't it?
It's been a bit slow. You see the cold air is actually still quite far away at this point, but if the northeasterly wind were to continue, it wouldn't be that difficult to tap into these much colder uppers. Still quite far away, but
that's right. I think it certainly is a little bit more encouraging than the GFS, what the GFS was showing.
I definitely agree with that. So we're gonna have to wait, I guess, a few minutes before we see the 216. That is it better than the 0Z of the ECM? Let's have a quick look at that again, just to remind myself of what was going on there. I'm not sure if it is better, because the 0Z was still quite good relative to the GFS. You can see that still had a lot of the cold air quite close by, isn't it? I'm not sure if it is better than the 0Z out, if I'm honest. Actually, I'd say it's probably slightly worse, but it's a bit of an improvement on the GFS.
That's right. It's a very, very difficult and very subtle pattern. This, and I would expect more twists and turns in this 120, 144, 168 hour period. I'd expect more twists and turns there over the next day or two.
This could go either way, couldn't it? We could end up with a situation where these cold winds actually do dig into the UK, and we do get a genuine cold snap. Alternatively, we could have this area of low pressure move northwestward, and we can have the cold air sort of siphoned off and affecting Iceland. And then the UK is not in a warm pattern, but it's in a sort of very unsettled, low pressure dominated pattern. Even if that happens, though, in the worst case scenario, even if that happens, the broad pattern is still very, very good. So even if that were to happen, there's still plenty of opportunities for this area of low pressure to eventually end up somewhere over here near Scandinavia, and then for us to still have another crack at a northerly wind. So I think even if we don't get a cold snap sort of by the time we get to the end of this month, I think there's still a good chance that we could get a cold snap in early December, the first week of December.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't be ruling it out based on the weather patterns that we're looking at the moment. Definitely not.
I've got 216 now. I don't know what to make of that, really. It's not really much of an improvement. It's certainly not worse, but
the low pressure seems to be struggling, doesn't it? It doesn't seem to be moving in with conviction, which again is something that we've seen a lot of over the past few months with these rather abnormal weather patterns that we've been in. Low pressure typically hasn't been moving in with a great deal of conviction from off the Atlantic. So again, it is struggling. The low pressure is struggling there.
Cold air is very gradually getting closer.
Slowly seeping in, isn't it? As the low pressure's kind of stalling in the middle of the Atlantic.
I think this is the sort of situation where if we were to get some kind of secondary low forming, I'm not sure that would actually happen. But let's say we get some sort of secondary low forming, so out of this one, so maybe along this sort of trough here, and it forms across sort of central parts of England. That would be an ideal situation for some heavy snow. That would be very good, I would think.
Right, like a slider low.
Yes. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be cold enough for convective-based snow, but if we were to get something sliding across in that sort of area just to the north of the front, you know those sort of weird patterns that you get, where you get in the far north you get light rain, then you get moderate or heavy snow close to the front, and then you get heavy rain to the south of it. So you get a sort of rain, snow, rain pattern.
Yeah.
Those sorts of situations, because you get rain to the north because it's not heavy enough and there's not enough evaporative cooling because it's also windier for it to turn to snow. You get snow in the middle because it's still on the cold side, but it's also the wind has also dropped and there's also a hell of a lot of evaporative cooling with the heavy precipitation. So you get snow in the middle, and then you get rain on the south because the south is of course the milder side. So this could be potentially one of those sort of rain, snow, rain patterns.
That's right. It might be if there was a sort of a slider low pushing.
Well, of course, this isn't. I mean, this pattern here is not one of that situation. But what I'm saying is, hypothetically, we could get something developing here.
If some energy broke away from the main low, then yeah, that could be possible. But the main thing, of course, is the cold air is gradually seeping in day by day. It's gradually allowing that cold air to seep in from the northeast. So, which is a little bit different to what the GFS is showing, I think.
Of course, the other thing is if this low pressure mix, I mean, it's almost a bad sign if the low pressure is really struggling, because if it just sort of stays here, then there's always the chance that we could start to draw southwesterly winds up, and that would turn things a lot milder. But if this low was to actually, move to the east and move across the UK, then when it was, by the time it sort of gets to sort of Scandinavia and Europe, then behind that low would be on the colder side. So that would be another opportunity to bring colder air towards the UK. And that could still happen. I mean, that's still good.
Yeah, that's right. So watch out what's happening with the heights down to the south.
Are they increasing? That's not a good sign, is it, really? It's got sort of high pressure developing over the Azores, never a good sign.
No, don't want to see the heights raising over Spain and Iberia particularly.
Definitely not.
I think it's going to leave us poised, this. I don't think it's going to be, when we get to 240, I don't think it's going to be definitive one way or the other.
We've got high pressure over the North Pole, which is always a good sign. Or not North Pole. North Pole's actually here where low pressure is, but we've got high pressure over the Arctic basin.
Yeah, definitely some real sort of high latitude, high pressure there.
I think See, you can tell there's some really, really cold air here. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of potential. We just need to tap into it. I mean, I mean, if I had to guess, I would say if I was to look at the 850 anomalies over here, I would say they were at least 10 degrees below average. That would be my hunch. Let's see.
That looks really severe up there, doesn't it? Actually, the cold.
Okay, maybe not quite 10 degrees, but 8 degrees below average up there. So
yeah, of course, that's a very cold place anyway. So
that's a cold place anyway, yeah.
So to be that much below average, that's going to be really cold. If we was to get some sort of long vection or feasterly, then there's plenty of cold to tap into.
This is whether we can tap into it. You can see sort of the warmer slice going down the middle here, which is where the high pressure is over the Arctic. Which, I mean, it's a good sort of thing to see. I mean, it's also like if you were to, you can't get it on these charts, but if you were to look at the 500 millibar temperatures, and when you get like cold on this side and cold on this side, that sort of suggests that the polar vortex is kind of splitting into two pieces, which is always a good thing.
Definitely.
Okay, let's see.
It's quite cold in the east of America, doesn't it?
That's not a good sign to have cold there. Not so much, really. I think, I mean, these sorts of upper air temperatures on. Oh, do you mean here in Canada?
Yeah, going more towards Canada.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah. This is cold here, but in America, I think this is actually fairly mild. I mean, it's still cold, but it's actually fairly mild. Actually, you really want to be seeing sort of these mild anomalies in America. That's actually exactly the sort of thing that you do want to be seeing. Anyway, we now have the last chart, so we can have a quick look at that then. There's no change, is there?
Very much poised, isn't it, to go either way. It leaves us on a real knife edge of what way that's going to go. I think overall, though, it is better if you want colder weather for the end of November and start of December. I think that's definitely better than the GFS.
It's like ending on a to be continued, though. It's just not what you want to see. It's not. It's
hanger, isn't it?
The cold air is definitely seeping in there. I mean, I'd expect. The one thing that I don't like about this, though, is if you're sort of in the southern part of England, and like you're getting to a situation where it's starting to snow in Scotland, and then you have to wait days and days and days before it actually gets to the south. That could be one of those situations.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just really struggling. It's not making much progress. It's a good chart, though. I mean, I think people should keep in mind the broad pattern is very, very good. It's just not quite as good as it could be, but there's a lot to be optimistic about here.
In the circumstances, that looks pretty decent, doesn't it? It looks like there's a little bit of energy starting to break away from that main low in the Atlantic as well, I think. So
well, that's definitely good, isn't it?
Maybe some sort of slider could happen there, actually.
Still got this Azores thing going on though. That could be a.
That's why it really is on a knife edge which way that would go.
We're losing the high pressure over Greenland as well. This could be quite this could go either way. It really could. It could be disappointing or it could be quite good. I don't know.
To be continued.
Exactly. I think that's the main thing to take away from this.
And expect many more twists and turns, I think, over the days and the weeks ahead. I don't think it's going to be an easy time frame for forecasters. I think there's going to be a lot going on and a lot to keep an eye on.
Well, I will ask you though, with the exception of 2010, has there ever been a more exciting late November model watching period?
No, I think this is the most interesting period we've had at this point of the year. Since 2010, I said that in a video a couple of days.
But even if you had to go before 2010, if we just forget about 2010, was there ever another example of a year that you can remember there being so much interest early on?
Not really. Probably 1993 had quite an interesting November.
Okay.
I got quite cold right at the very end, but that's because before the internet, really. So I think within the internet era, other than 2010, this is probably the most interesting sort of late November period that we've had. So it's a time to just keep an eye on what's going on, run by run and day by day, and expect the unexpected.
Indeed, I'll definitely reiterate that point. So I think we basically come to the end now. I believe if things get more interesting, there will be more opportunities to do this sort of thing in the future, and people seem to enjoy this sort of live stream event when it happens. So we're always pleased to do them, and thanks for all the questions that have been asked. So yeah, I think it's gone quite well, really.
Yeah, big thank you to everybody for asking their questions, and hope they enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you. So see you all later.